Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. We're delighted to have you joining us for Advancing the America's Economy, the Role of Private Capital. As Americans reel from a pandemic-induced economic downturn, the question of how to bring businesses back from the brink and create jobs is one of really profound significance. We will spend the next hour examining private capital, one of the key drivers of business investment, innovative reorientation, and expansion in the country. At first, the concept of groups investing in companies was non-controversial, but scale and success have in some cases led to massive wealth and some controversies. Private capital can play a substantial role in job creation, but a trustworthy partnership must be established with the public. Today, we'll explore this responsible equilibrium between private interest and public good and examine how it fits into our roadmap for economic advancement. I'd like to thank our sponsor for today, the American Investment Council, for their support of this event. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers to help us get smarter on this topic, policymakers, some CEOs, and leading academics. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes, and I always laugh at these. You can, well, not at this one. You can tweet us at The Hill Events, using the hashtag #TheHillInvests. That's a lot of letters, but please do it. We are broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. As with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble with the video. Refreshing the page could in most cases fix the problem. I'm going to refresh mine right now. My first guest today is Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy of Florida. She's a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. A former businesswoman, Representative Murphy has been serving in Congress since 2017. Her state has seen an explosion of coronavirus cases in the past few weeks, which will no doubt take a toll on its economy as well. Representative Murphy, along with some of her colleagues, recently introduced a bipartisan bill to expand the employee retention tax credit and prevent further layoffs. Congressman Murphy, thank you so much for joining us. And I know you just wrapped up a vote, rushing back to your office. So really, thank you so much for squeezing us in. Let me just ask you to kind of, solve our riddle today. What's the right social contract when it comes to employers, investment, and these times? We're talking about private capital in firms today. You know that world well. How do you get the social contract equities right? The Congresswoman is on mute, I think.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Thank you so much for having me with you today and for hosting such an important conversation as we look at not just getting through this public health crisis and the ensuing economic crisis, but also as we look outwards towards recovery as a nation. You mentioned in your introduction of me that I had worked in the private sector, and so I really appreciate the different roles that private capital and public funds have in our economy. And even before this crisis, I was a bit concerned about the rising conversation on the Hill and in our public debate about socialism. And I wrote an op-ed declaring, I'm a proud capitalist, but I'm a capitalist who believes that we need to have a democratic capitalist system that is that has a market economy driven by innovation of the private sector, but constrained by guardrails constructed by a duly elected government. And this model, this democratic capitalist model that we've had in the U.S. has helped us build the greatest nation and the strongest economy in the world. And I think it would be folly to abandon it. But the balance between the innovation of the private sector and guardrails from the government is the topic that you're talking about today. And I think in order for us to have a real conversation about what that balance looks like, we have to step away from the rhetoric and not necessarily discriminate about the sources of capital, and allow for that there is a role for government in ensuring that our capitalism works for everyone.
One of the things that this administration did do is it lowered the corporate tax rate. And that, we had Democrats and Republicans both thinking that had to happen because the United States was really out of whack with what global tax rates were, and we saw a lot of firms being right. And part of that deal was for private investment to flow back, to come into U.S. firms, and to play a big role. And I know a number of cases where this has robustly happened. Is it your sense that this equation is going the right direction right now?
I actually think that this administration's economic policies worked in conflict with one another. So while they asked the American people to take, a massive debt in providing tax cuts for the wealthiest among us and the largest corporations, they also pursued a trade policy that taxed those very same American businesses and American consumers. And when they pursued this trade policy, what business wanted to come back and exist behind the trade walls that they had thrown up? So I don't think that we saw the benefit of the tax cuts that they had intended, because they had conflicting policy that actually worked in direct and conflict with one another. The other thing I will say too is that with the tax cut that was had, we can debate what level that tax cut should have been and at what rate they should have set it at. But what is not debatable is the giant hole they put into our debt, driving up debt and deficits, leaving us on a less stable financial footing when we encountered this pandemic and the ensuing economic crisis. And I think that that is really problematic, because now we are having to spend in order to save lives and livelihood. And we would have been in a better position had they not had such a fiscally irresponsible tax cut.
One of the criticisms of the private capital world, if I may, is that it trades in debt, that it acquires firms, it brings in things, and so the debt dimension creates other pressures on employees, it creates other pressures on whether things stay open or not. In my world, to be quite candid, I look at that as part of the way business works, but I know that that's part of it. When you look at the impact of COVID on this economy, nearly every large company that I know has had to build debt in order to keep cash flowing. So is anything in my equation not right in there? That in that world of debt and needing infusions of capital right now, that the private capital is one of those key sources. The government has provided some of that, like to the airlines, and they've been negotiating about what levels of debt United and Delta and American and others build up. But I'm just sort of, it's one of the criticisms that I don't quite understand, because if they don't have that debt flow, they're going to be bankrupt, right? So that is, particularly in this economic moment, where, as Rachel Maddow would say, tell me where I'm wrong, talk me down.
Yeah, so I think, having worked in the business world, I understand that there is a role for debt and leverage, and that there are a lot of different sources of capital. So I don't necessarily have that reflexive approach towards debt. What I do find kind of problematic in the current situation that we have with the pandemic is that the big lifeline that we threw businesses was through the PPP program. And that really asked small, medium-sized businesses to take on debt at a time when their revenue was dropping precipitously. A small business owner looking at the uncertainty of their revenue streams and sort of the uncertainty that this pandemic has caused about their ability to reopen and return to normal operating conditions, asking one of those people at that moment to take on debt seems counterintuitive to me. I actually believe that in this moment of unprecedented economic crisis due to a public health condition that is at no fault of any of these businesses alone, there's a role for government to provide necessary support to these businesses to get them through. And I actually think it's better done through the employee retention tax credit, as opposed to asking these companies to go out and seek a loan and have a potential debt. I think the other thing I would say too is that in this kind of unprecedented economic moment, if we want to protect American workers and American jobs, I think we should look at them sort of equally. A job is a job is a job. Workers really don't care what kind of company they're working for, the tax structure of the company that they're working for, whether it's public or private, or if its capital is coming from private equity or from the public markets, what its ownership structure is. All they know is that this is a job. It provides them income and access to health benefits that's going to help them get through this moment. And so the fact that here on Capitol Hill, we're trying to make distinctions about, do you qualify as an SBA defined small business and therefore your job is worthy of keeping, or whether you're a business that has private capital in it and therefore your job isn't worthy of keeping. That's a distinction that I don't think the American people are making.
I'd like to just give you a moment to tell us a little bit more about your legislation and how it would actually work.
Sure. So the employee retention tax credit is already in law. It passed as a part of the CARES Act. And what we're seeking to do in the next round of COVID bills is to expand the employee retention tax credit. It is a refundable tax credit for businesses that have been impacted by the pandemic. And it would currently what it does is it covers 50% of payroll costs through a refundable tax credit. So it uses all the existing infrastructure that is there between a business and Treasury and the IRS to provide this support. I think in a crisis, it's a wrong time to build a brand new program. This is a program that has been used in after previous national disasters and works. What I'm looking to do in the next COVID bill is to expand it to cover 80% of payroll and to increase the limit to $15,000 a quarter, up to $45,000 a year. That is more consistent with the average payroll in this country, and it also provides for the calibration to provide assistance to businesses that may have a longer runway back to normal. It helps to keep workers tethered to their jobs and their healthcare benefits, which is critically important in the midst of a pandemic.
Let me just ask you finally, and this is going to be sort of a big meta question. I've really enjoyed talking to you. It's nice to talk to somebody who's actually run a business before and been in that world. But when I worked in the Senate in the 1990s and I did economic policy, and we were looking at companies and why they weren't putting more into health packages for people and why pensions weren't portable, and we were asking people to live in a turbocharged economy, but we weren't giving them the benefits to do that. There was a big divide between publicly held firms and privately held firms. And that's when some of the roots of the private capital world began to come in, and you could kind of look across the board that private capital was actually, on the whole, you saw them doing things and acting more patiently, that there was, a greater investment, at least at that time, in workers. And I think, we see returns are different. The behavior of private capital and then public firms is different, and the short-termism in public. Is that awareness out there? I mean, Florida is the third state, the third in the ranking of private capital investment in the United States, behind California and Texas. Is there an awareness of that divide between, short-termism and long-termism that I also think is part of this discussion today?
One of the reasons why I think it's so important to have members of Congress who have diverse backgrounds is that it takes having worked in the industries and to understand that. For Florida, we have $6 billion in private equity investment. We have over 12,000, almost 13,000 private equity-backed companies. They are creating jobs. They are contributing to the economy. And they do have a different approach to benefits. I think we're going to come out of this COVID experience understanding that we all have a role in ensuring that people have access to health care, and that benefits and things like that shouldn't be a luxury, that they are part of keeping a healthy society and a healthy economy. And I'm hopeful that we come out of this moment where we are exposing sort of the weaknesses in our system with a renewed commitment to corporate patriotism and to doing the right thing for our workers and our economy, because that contributes to a healthier consumer base, and it allows everybody to benefit from this. And whether that is, and I hope to see that kind of patriotism, not just from the private company world, but also from our publicly held companies.
Well, Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, thank you so much for sharing this. I know Florida's just having a tough time right now, so keep at it. I know that these questions of how to put the economy back together after all this are going to continue to be vital ones, so I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. Thank you so much.
I'd love to do that. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.